Hi, I'm Lenise Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. On today's episode, we have Allysa Rochelle. Rochelle is the vulnerability queen. She's a podcaster and the founder of TING, a social enterprise for young creatives. She combines her experience of significant trauma in her childhood and her love for creativity to curate content that inspires people to begin their own healing process. Welcome to the show.
Hello, hey. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Let's start off by getting into the story of your very first period. Can you share with us what happened?
Yeah, so I just want to kind of like preface before I even start talking and just be like, my story of my first period story. I'm so happy that you asked me to be on this podcast because it has actually got me thinking about my period. And I want to put some trigger warnings in there. There's like a lot of stuff that might bring stuff up for other people. So I'll just kind of say that before I start. So my first period, I think I was about probably like year 7, maybe like 11, 12, around that type of age. And I remember being in my lesson and being in like uncomfortable, like something's happening. And it's like a bellyache because obviously as a kid, I'm like, oh, this is a bellyache. And then I remember at some point in the day going to the toilet and noticing that something was in my pant. And it wasn't red. It wasn't like blood red. It was like brown, weird, like kind of cut out. So I remember being really embarrassed and being like, I don't know if I'm like, oh my God, have I shit myself type thing. Like, that's just the truth. I literally thought that I had, but then also being like, I definitely haven't, like, because I would have known that if I did. But just not knowing what it was that I had no information as to kind of what was happening to my body. So for the for like the next few days, it kept on happening, and I just kept on being confused and like washing my knickers out at home and hiding them, and then just going through that whole process. And that happened. And I had said nothing for about 3-4 months. And then it got to a point when I was like, something keeps happening to me and I don't know what it is. And so like, just to kind of come back and tell me about your first period. When I think about that, I think about how was I not prepared for that situation? So yeah, my first period was like, it was traumatic, and I suppose it was my first entry. No, it wasn't my first entry. I probably was very used to shame by then, but it was like a massive shameful thing for me because I was unaware of what was happening to my body. I was in a lot of pain, and I wasn't speaking about it at all to anybody.
So your friends hadn't had their periods yet, or it was just that you just weren't having that conversation with your friends?
I think if we had spoken about periods at that point, it wasn't like, it's the same way like kids talk about sex. It's like nobody knows what they're talking about. You're just saying the words and kind of trying to sound like an adult. So
Yeah.
if somebody had said something about a period, I probably just pretended I knew what was happening. But I think I don't know, like I probably need to like dig into this a little bit more, or maybe not, but I don't know why I never correlated the two. Like something, maybe I didn't realize it was happening monthly. It was just happening randomly. Do you know what I mean? And so I didn't have enough information to kind of put the pieces together to figure out that it was my period.
So when did you figure out what was happening?
I think eventually I told my mom. So myself and my mom didn't have a great relationship because she is extremely religious and extremely like conservative, I suppose I would say. Like it's not something that you speak about. And eventually I spoke to her. She was just like, that's your period. Why didn't you tell me? And I was like, I suppose just like, why did I not know that? But also like, how did you not prepare me to know that type thing? So there's like a whole lot of stuff going on. So eventually when I told her, she kind of basically just gave me some sanitary towels and told me to get on with it. And then I think once I realized what it was, I don't know if the pain got worse at that moment, because I remember I was in pain before I knew what it was. But after I knew what it was, the pain became like, I don't know, like a big part of my period life. Like anybody that knows me knows that Rochelle has very bad periods. Like I'm at times unable to walk, not so much now. Lying down, not going to work, like it stops my life. Like I got to a point in my life where I was like planning 4 days off a month of doing nothing because I physically couldn't move. But I remember, like, because I suppose of her cultural stance and her religion, it was very much so like, you get on with it, you do what you need to do, like, you don't get to be in pain, you're a woman now type thing. And so there's like a lot of negative programming around my period very early on.
So this idea of just getting on with it, your mom gave you the sanitary towels, told you just to get on with it, and you took that message, even though you were in significant amounts of pain. So 4 days of pain a month where you plan to do nothing, that's 48 days a year. I mean, that's a month and a half of your year saying in pain. And you know, when I talk about pain a lot with my clients and the rest of my work, and being able to put your pain in context like that and say, you know, at 48 days a year, you expect to be in a lot of pain. And the fact that you have this, you've internalized this message of, oh, I just need to get on with it. It says a lot about our culture and how we've tried to normalize women's pain. And I want to understand a little bit more about, so you've said that things are a bit different now. So what have you done to change the pain or change your expectations around the pain?
It's a good question. I think it's also, I think I have to say this point in order to kind of make my next point. So actually, after I started to have my period, I would probably say within like a year or 6 months, I started to then be sexually abused. And so I think that lasted a very long time. And I think that because I have more of a spiritual kind of like lens on life now, I think that the pain I was experiencing probably got a lot worse because of the trauma I was experiencing at the same time. I'd probably put money on the fact that it did, and my body was reacting. And so now, and my period pains have only been, I would say, bearable. Like I've been able to, I remember the last time I had to go home from work because of my period, it was last year. So that's quite a long time for me. Like just to have that amount of time with like not being completely like on bed rest is a really good time. So I would say in the last year or so, I've been able to do stuff like that I've actually planned to do, right? And I think it's because I realized how much trauma I had stored in my body. And I started to kind of like pay attention to it and do like exercises and be mindful of the fact that like, I suppose adapting some of your mentality around pain isn't normal. And maybe the pain is a residue of like, somebody said to me once, and I really hope that I can explain this in a way that people understand. She said to me, I was on a retreat, and this was in 2018, and the retreat was from 8 a.m. till like 6 p.m, right? So we had lunch and we were supposed to come back and do some activities. I came on my period, right? And I'm a person, I'm not extroverted, I'm not a look at me type person, but I was in so much pain, I couldn't take part in the afternoon activities, and they couldn't move on without me being in the room. And so one of the founders came upstairs and she said, when you experience, she came up with some magnesium to give me some magnesium, but she's like, when you experience trauma, especially in that womb space, she says everything in the universe expands and contracts. That's how like things move, expansion, contraction, and the same for your womb. And she said it's possible that it's contracted so tightly that when it needs to expand for your period, it struggles to do so. And it just gave me a different perspective, because I just had never seen my body in that way, or I never, I was still working out how everything was interlinked. Like everything is connected, like everything. And I'm still understanding that now, because it still blows my mind how much one thing can really affect another. And I just had this kind of image of like my womb just being so tightly held together, like tightly constricted, because of years of trauma in that space. And then all of the pain made so much sense. Then I was like, well, of course, if I have to be on my period, my body needs to go through this process, and it's used to being, because I'm actually quite tight naturally as a result. Like I do hold a lot. And so, yeah, I think since 2018, since I had that kind of realization, and I've been more mindful about how the body stores trauma, I think my periods have got better. I think I've started to eat better. I've started to move my body. I think just having an awareness has shifted for me. So yeah, my periods are painful, 100%. But I realize now, like where before, like I said, 4 days, I can't move. Like I'm day 3 and I'm still screaming. Do you know what I mean? Now I reckon it's probably like 1 day of extreme pain, maybe a bit of pain the next day, half the day, and then I'm okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not completely. I'm not pain free, and there are still times where I take cocodamol, like for the pain that I have, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was like 10 years ago.
That's interesting what you say about magnesium, because I see this a lot with some of the women I work with who have really severe period pain, or who have conditions such as endometriosis or adenomyosis, where it's a contraction in their body, and the pain, it almost causes them to kind of hold into, like tighten everything, and kind of they're so used to doubling over in pain or contracting themselves into a ball, because when you're in a lot of pain, you kind of all you want to do is lay down. And I know this from my own experience. You want to lay down and you kind of just contract into that kind of you're into that fetal position that can be so comforting. But that contraction is, on a kind of scientific level, it's using a lot of calcium in the body.
Okay.
And then magnesium, it's a relaxing mineral, so it helps release everything. So magnesium, I mean, I recommend it all the time. It's one of my favorite supplements. But it's interesting that you've seen being able to identify that kind of contraction, and having a tool like magnesium and other things you've been doing to release that has been so powerful for you. I want to ask about the pain that you've been experiencing. Did you ever speak to anyone about it? Did you speak to a doctor?
Yeah. So I've been to the doctors, but that's such a good question as well. Like I think there's this thing about doctors not really paying attention very much to Black women and pain. So that was my experience, but I'm also very, very desensitized to support and the system. So I kind of just go in there knowing that this is awful, but I'm just going to call it out. I expect the bare minimum, because I'm used to receiving it, if that makes sense, especially when it comes to systems like education and healthcare. And so I had kind of done my own research beforehand. They never went through, like, I've never been tested for endo. They've never looked at it's just never been anything more than contraception. Here you go. And so I was I didn't want to be on the pill or anything. I tried the pill once, and I was so sick. I remember the day I felt like I was heaving, like I felt like I wanted to vomit, and my stomach, because I have IBS as well, like I've got like a bloated stomach situation. It came out really, and it was really hard. And I was like, day one, I was like, I know you probably could try this for like 7 days and it might get better, but I'm not going to do that. And so the contraception that I decided that I would take was the contraceptive patch, because it just wasn't internal, and it allowed my periods to kind of stop, like, or not stop, less pain. So I did that, and it worked. But then I just wanted to be more natural. And so I kind of the idea that like hormones, I have like a weight issue as well. Like I gain weight quickly, and I'm not on top of my health enough to kind of then add hormones in. It's like, I kind of know that like this is a slippery slope. and I'd rather deal with the issue. So I stopped using the patch probably around the same kind of time, 2018, after quite a few years of doing it. And yeah, that's basically all the doctors have ever kind of like offered me. It's never been more of a conversation around other things. But I do have friends that have endo and they've had to fight to be taken seriously about the pain that they're experiencing. And I have wondered sometimes whether it could be something more serious. Like people say, oh, maybe because I have the bloating, maybe you have PCOS, or maybe you have. And I'm also very aware that like the I have to call it out and say what it is. I'm on a journey. This is why I call myself the vulnerability queen. For me, it's a process. Like I know that I have to get to a process where I prioritize myself enough to kind of like kick down the doors in the doctors. But just to kind of like connect that again to my like upbringing, I wasn't really taught that your kind of needs matter, if that makes sense. In just to kind of go back to the example of my mum just being like, oh, here you go, here's some pads, get on with it. And so like I think there's definitely a remnant of that kind of thought process and programming when it comes to my own needs even today, and just something that I'm continuously working on. So maybe in the future I will go to the doctors. If I can't fix it myself, I'll go to the doctors and I'll probably get tested for something. I don't know what it could be, but I know that there's something now right there.
I would really encourage you to explore that, because the pain that you are experiencing isn't normal, and I don't want you to continue to live like this. Everything you're saying is like ticking off certain boxes in my mind. And I don't want to do the whole thing. You're not one of my clients, and I don't want to go down. This is a podcast, so I'm not going to go down that. I would really encourage you to speak to a healthcare professional and explore what options are available for you for testing, because there's so much there. And it is part of that journey of you knowing that your needs matter. And I want to ask you about, that whole idea of growing up and hearing this programming of, well, your needs don't matter, your needs don't matter. Talk about how you started to understand that your needs do matter, and what you've been doing to explore that and reinforce that message to yourself.
So that retreat that I went on in 2018 is called the Bridge Retreat. If anyone wants to search that up on Instagram, the Bridge Retreat, they're amazing. And it's all about grieving like things that have happened to you. So it could be anything. It could be the fact that your house burnt down when you were trying and you lost absolutely everything, or it just could literally like we don't grieve, and that's the problem, that we're not naturally or society doesn't allow us to grieve in the way that we should be. So in that I understood, like just kind of telling my story and having a space for me to be heard, how much I hadn't been heard up until that point. And that was just that, I mean, this is 2 years ago. Do you know what I mean? I think it was a bit of a light bulb for me, like, oh wow, like I have been ignoring my needs, and I've been in service to other people, because my job is always in service. I help people, I support people, that's what I do. And so kind of like looking at my codependency and all the things that have come out of the need of me not knowing what my needs are. So the first thing was to kind of get really still and ask myself, like, what do you need? Like, what are your needs? Which is a wild question. If you don't, like, when you realize you don't know the answer to that question, it's like, I don't know. It's like a big like bomb drop. So you're like, how the hell could I not answer that question for myself? And I'm still learning how to answer that question. I ask myself that question consistently now. Like, what do you need in this moment? And you can start off with something like, you're dehydrated, you need water. Do you know what I mean? Like, drink, because you need the water, and your programming would naturally tell you to complete a million different tasks for other people before you drink that water. But actually, no, you need that, or you need sleep now, or you need rest because you're tired and you've done enough for today, or you need to be seen in your relationship by your partner in a way that they haven't seen you because you've not said that you need to be seen in this way. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's just like it was many different ways of identifying what I needed for me to kind of start feeling like my needs were worthy. And then, because I think another thing as well is that I just think the way in which society is formed is so like detrimental to people. Like, because this whole thing about ego, I mean, there are massive conversations around ego. But I think when it comes to kind of like people being really firm in who they are and what they need, it can come off as quite abrasive to other people. And so I think as women as well, you're consistently like, oh no, I'm okay. Oh no, I'm okay. Oh no, I'm okay. And it's because you just don't want to be this abrasive kind of like egotistical person. And also being a Black woman, you don't want to be aggressive or whatever all of the things that they put on you.
Quote unquote aggressive.
Yeah. So you're like, so I think like figuring out your needs and then voicing them is a task in itself. And then especially for people that are from similar backgrounds from me, but then doing that and knowing the way in which society kind of sees Black women and the way we're seen as like, once again, aggressive, attitude problems, like, I don't know, we're a lot. I know it's just like that you have to grapple both of those things at the same time. It becomes political, like when you just want to be healing, like, and you just want to be working out like who you are and how to be. So you're like now navigating these identity politics at the same time. It's just a thing. And so I think just kind of identifying my needs and working out what they were was just a series of me asking myself questions on a daily basis. What do you need right now? What do you need right now? On a very simple level, like water, but then like on a more a deeper level when it comes to the part I play in relationships with people. And getting really real with myself about how I do too much for other people and why I do too much and what does that take me away from doing for myself. So it's like an ongoing journey, and I think it's just a long journey.
What do you think about the idea of the strong Black woman, and how do you think this plays into this idea that we as women, we tend to put our needs second, and I think that's a kind of thing that a lot of women do. But as this idea of a strong Black woman, you feel like you can't show vulnerability. You have to be so-called strong all the time because loads of people are standing on your back trying to get ahead. What do you think about that?
I think the strong Black woman like stereotype is mad interesting because like what you said is like the Black woman is quote unquote strong because she puts everyone else's needs first. Is that strength? Like, is that strength? And it's like, why is that stereotype being perpetuated so strongly? You know, like because it's like the Black women I know are strong. If I talk generationally, when I think about the elder women that I'm aware of, or in my family, they're very much so women that do carry their families on their backs, for example. Is that strength? Because I would have preferred to see a strength of a woman that put herself first. But then, like I say, it gets political when we start thinking about the reasons why Black women have had to play those roles, you know? And the fact that Black men, you know, were out of, but especially in America, I need to learn more about the way in which the family structure was affected by systemic racism in the UK. But I know within America, like the men were like taken out of the houses, and obviously you've got mass incarceration and other things. There's so many things playing into kind of like why women have to become these strong. But I think it's strong by default. So especially like I went on a little site, like a commercial break. I went on a date once with this white guy from a dating app. I was just like, let me just try something different, right? And I realized at that moment I was like, okay, this is not, I can't do this, because I sat with him and we were talking and he said that he loves Black women because we're strong, and I felt fire in my chest when he said that. I love Black women because they're strong, and I was like, do you know why we have to be strong? Like I was like, you can't, like, this is not, it's not, what is that? Like, what is that? And this is ages ago, before I kind of, I suppose, had the the vocab to really understand it myself. But the idea that like Black women are seen as martyrs that carry everybody and everything and forsake themselves is not strength to me. And I hate that it's romanticized and fetishized in a way, and kind of like it doesn't allow for softness.
Yeah.
And say what you want about me, I'm very, very formidable. I'm just got this like energy, and people think that I'm strong and whatever else. I want to be soft too. And I don't want to be around people that don't allow me to be soft because I'm a strong Black. I've had exes that have said that, oh, you're so intelligent, you're so strong. And I'm just like, this is where the relationship ends, because I just don't like, I'm also quite zero tolerance, but I'm very much so just like, you need to be able to see beneath that. So I think it's damaging, but I think that the strength stereotype comes from a need to support a family, because society has failed the Black family for a very long time. That's basically that. And if society wasn't failing Black families, then the strong Black woman wouldn't need to exist.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Your story about the date reminds me of this scene. Have you read Queenie?
I haven't. No, I haven't read it.
It's a must read. It's so good.
Okay.
There's a scene in it that's similar to the way that your date went. She goes on this dating app. She meets this guy, and then he talks about how he loves Black women and he loves strong Black women, and it just kind of, the date just kind of descends into chaos from there.
It's not great. It's not a good start.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree with you that it's damaging, and it leads to this idea that we can't be soft, and it's damaging internally because you feel like you can't be vulnerable because people are expecting so much from you. And it's certainly an issue that I've had in my life, this idea that you have to be strong. So many people are depending on you. But this leads into then what I want to ask you about. You call yourself the vulnerability queen. Tell me why. You talked a little bit about that in the beginning of the podcast, but just tell me where this comes from, the vulnerability queen.
So I started a podcast called Vulnerable Podcast in 2017, and it came about because, like I said, my job, I've always been in service. Like I work with people, young people especially, and the role that I had at the time was head of pastoral in a school. So I was like looking after the needs of the whole school, right? And that job was a culmination of all of the jobs I had done that was similar up until that point. So my job has always been everybody else's needs. And what was happening is I was kind of hearing a lot of stories about people's, traumas and stuff. And I was realizing that I was hearing the same things over and over again. And that we were all going through the same things. And shame stopped us from experiencing those things. Shame stopped us from sharing those things with other people because you didn't want to, I suppose, feel embarrassed about the things that you're going through. So that was one point. That was the reason why I started the podcast. But then I reflected on my own experience with vulnerability, and the way which I was raised to not have any vulnerability at all. You do not speak on things that can make you to be seen. I'm talking at an extreme level. I feel like when I think about my mom and even the way how she conducts herself now, I'm just it's really sad that nobody, she doesn't let anyone in to her person. And it's that shame and it's that guilt that stops her from being vulnerable. And so for me, I was like, nope, no ma'am, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to lean into my vulnerability and encourage other people to do so too, specifically people that look like me, that are from places that are similar to where I'm from, because shame eats us up so much more. And I think it's fair to say that it eats Black people up way more, because outside of the internal shame from your community, you're dealing with the racism externally. and how that shame can manifest in other places, in your work life, in your education, in like, do you know what I mean? It's like you're managing so many, you're spinning so many plates, and it's killing us, because we know that stress turns into sickness. Do you know what I mean? And so for me, vulnerability is that thing where it's like you get to kind of release things that you shouldn't be carrying, and free yourself of holding something that isn't yours. And by no means am I like Brené Brown or some type of like guru. Like, I'm figuring this out, but I want to call it a thing. Like, I want to say that I am consciously and intentionally working in vulnerability on a daily basis to support other people to kind of do so. So like by actually modeling that, to me, is really important. And I've had to find, just to be like really honest, I've had to find some balance with that, because when you're coming from trauma, initially when you think about vulnerability, it's like, I'm going to tell the world everything about me and everything that's happened to me, and it's going to be some type of oil spill of trauma everywhere, right? Because initially that's what vulnerability is, like when you first step into it. And on the healing journey, it's like, I'm like, oh no, like I don't have to say all of the things, but I can still get to model vulnerability in a different way. So I've had to kind of like, on a vulnerability spectrum, like figure out like where's the safe space for me to kind of do the work that I know that I'm here to do, but in a safe way for me. And that's just, I suppose, something I've been able to kind of like pick up on and develop via therapy and stuff. But yeah, that's my thing. My thing is modeling vulnerability. And you know, and it makes me think, I had one of my ex-students DM me about a couple of days ago, and we're just talking about the things that she's been experiencing and the books that she's been reading and how she likes my Instagram and stuff like that. And I'm like, imagine like an 18-year-old black girl from South London is reading Louise Hay. Like, who would have, like, it's stereotypically not what you would put together, but she's able to kind of like see the types of things that I'm posting and kind of apply these things to her own life and her own personal healing journey. And like, that's how I kind of want to, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. It's hard to be vulnerable, and it's hard to, I love how you said that there's a spectrum to vulnerability, because I think that a lot of people think that to be vulnerable, you have to completely open yourself up. And if you're used to holding things for yourself and having everything internalized for so long, the idea of even opening up a little bit is really frightening. But I want to ask, that spectrum of vulnerability that you mentioned, how can someone who's listening to this and thinking, I connect with that need to be more open, to be more vulnerable, and vulnerability isn't a bad thing, how can they start on this journey?
I'd say journaling. I was thinking like of some big answer, and I was like, no, there's no big answer. I think journaling for me is really helps me to tap into those kind of feelings that I don't want to say out loud to everybody. So sometimes I'll just be, there's the journaling that you're encouraged to do at night, and when you wake up in the morning, there's that. And that should definitely be done. Like, I think it's important to do that before you go to sleep and when you wake up in the morning. But for me, I've caught some of my best, like, vulnerable moments. Not that there's some type of, like, race. So what's the best? When, like, in the middle of the day, when something just bubbles up and it just comes out, and I'm like, whoa. And it almost brings me to tears. And then I write it down. Because it needs to leave. I find that, I think giving the vulnerability a space is important. So when you're having a moment where you're feeling vulnerable and it's come out of nowhere, for example, society's programming will have you bury it and put it back down. And I'm like, create a table for it. Like, let's put it on an altar. Like, what is going on? Like, like you would serve dinner and like a table that's set. Like, let's bring that to the table. Do you know what I mean? What is that about? Write it down. You don't need to know what it's about right now, but I think it's important to pay attention, and like the ritual of paying attention for me is writing it down. I think people can start there.
Okay.
I would also encourage, I find friendship really interesting because I have had the most phenomenal friends in my life, people that I can speak to about anything, right? And I am more mindful now that a lot of people do not have that, and a lot of people have really superficial friendships. And that, to me, makes me feel claustrophobic. Like, how do you not get to share a part of who you are? So I would say, if you're in a friendship circle and you don't feel like you get into that part of you that is seen and heard, then make a new friend. Like, put yourself out there. And I'm also really starting to get into manifestation. So I'm very much just so like, oh, I need somebody who I can be friends with and be myself with. Write that down, call it in, and then go out to new places and meet someone that can be your friend in that way. Because it's important that outside of yourself, that other people are able to hold space for you too. In a way, it's kind of like validation of who you are, because we're not islands, are we, as people? Like, we feel all of the things that we feel, but it's incredible to be supported by someone else. You know, if you don't have that in family, I don't, it has become my friend. And if it's not your friend, it's your partner, you know. But I think it's important to have someone. I think it's important to take inventory of who is in your life and who is actually able to show up for you. And if there isn't anyone you can identify, call someone else in. Like, you have to. Like, you have, like, for me, that's a non-negotiable. You have to have people around you that allow you to be your complete self.
Yeah. It's interesting. You talked about journaling, and then you talk about how you relate and how you're vulnerable to others. And this idea, it's like two types of vulnerability. It's being vulnerable to yourself and acknowledging how you feel and really going there and going deep into certain thoughts and feelings. And then also allowing yourself to be open and vulnerable with others and finding that support network. I think those two areas are really interesting and really powerful and give people a good starting point. So journaling is something that anyone can do. You can do it on your phone, you can get a book, a bit of paper, doesn't matter. But just even writing a couple of words down and then thinking about those words is really powerful. So I love those two options that you gave there. I want to talk more about your work. So tell us about your business, the social enterprise TING.
Yeah, so like I said, I've worked with people for a really long time, and in 2018 was a really pivotal year for me. I keep saying it, don't I?
Yeah.
I need to look at my like chart, my solar chart or something, and see what was happening there. Okay, so I left education that year because it became too much once again. Like, we don't get to separate identities, and as a Black woman working in majority white spaces, it was way too much for me. And supporting Black students at the same time. So I was kind of being asked to support these kids and then fighting for my own kind of like humanity. And it's like I could no longer do both things. So I left and I went to work within the creative industries, supporting young people to get mentors within the creative industries, and realized that the issue that I faced in education existed outside too. So spaces weren't safe for Black and brown people. There was a lot of opportunities created for marginalized groups in terms of like, here's an internship program, or here's a mentor, or here's some funding. And it was kind of like plasters on wounds. Like, let's just give them something so we feel good. This whole benevolence. And I was just like, this doesn't feel right, because I've spent, I'd say, the best part of the last 4 or 5 years hooking young people up with the most phenomenal opportunities, but also having conversations with them about their ability to access those opportunities. So, for example, their family is being made evicted and they've just got this mentor and they really want to make use of the opportunity, but they're unable to do so because of life. And the similar things that are coming up over and over again. Mental health is a big thing that comes up. Not having jobs for young people, massive, and how that's affecting their mental health. And so I'm having those conversations way more, and I'm realizing that my job title wasn't paying me to kind of like deal with that kind of pastoral stuff, but I was just doing it and realizing that if we could kind of put some support in place for that, and kind of an equity piece that allows these young Black and brown people to access these opportunities and then thrive, then that's a big piece of work that could literally change a lot. Does that make sense? The way in which the industry is, because everyone talks about retention and recruitment and we need to be more diverse, and it's kind of like I want to get into the nitty gritty of the reasons why, and I just didn't feel like anybody else saw. And to be fair, my jobs and my life experience have allowed me to see things in ways that people can't. So it's not like me throwing shame on the industry. It's more me being like, let me take my lens and what I know to be sure and do something. So TING is essentially a personal and professional development service for companies and young people. And so with companies, that might look like, I'm going to come in. I've had conversations with companies that have internship programs that are just like, oh yeah, our director gets an email and then we just kind of find 2 weeks for someone. Like that's nepotism, first of all. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to support with your diversity. Like, there's so much going on there. And it's like, okay, I can come in and help you to develop that internship program and create like an internship scheme that allows you to kind of get into more diverse communities, because I have access there. And then I can work with the young people to prepare them to go into your space, because they need to have resilience to be in that space, but you also need to be a safe space to receive them and know what you're both kind of working with. So that's what I'm saying. My life has kind of allowed me to see things on both sides. And so TING is that we provide the personal and professional for companies and personal and professional for young people. And it's at the beginning stages. And so I'm kind of at the stage now, just kind of like founding like a new entrepreneur, I'll say, figuring out like the best ways in which to kind of get this done. It's super new, but I feel like I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. What an amazing idea, because you're right. These companies have these diversity programs, these internships, but it's kind of like, it's this idea that the young people going in, they need to be prepared to code switch, and they need to know what the code is that they're switching to. It's like, I think I used to work in advertising for a long time, and this example that always sticks in my mind is young people from various backgrounds coming in, and it's the sushi with clients example. You need to tell them that they need to learn how to use chopsticks, and that they might have sushi with clients. And some people, they've never had that in their life. They have no idea that how to use chopsticks, and kind of need to have that conversation with them. And there's a million other examples, but I really love that the work that you're doing.
It's the cultural capital. It's like they're not coming to the table, like you said, with the same utensils that everybody else has. Because if you think about the advertising, is extremely middle class and extremely white. And if you think about a lot of these young people that work in advertising, it's very likely that they've had dinner parties with other people that work in advertising when they were like 12. Do you know what I mean? And they've been in conversations about things and pitches and brands and stuff, and like who that, I didn't know anything about that until 2 years ago. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm that person who had to learn how to eat with chopsticks really quickly, because I had to be able to kind of understand it and explain it to younger people that were coming in. And I think I've just got to a place, I suppose, once again, we're going back to the beginning of this conversation about needs and worthiness. Like I'm starting to kind of understand that I am the best person to do this job. And I don't get to opt out of that because of my own, I don't know, lack of self things that I've had growing up. It's like, oh no, this is time to step into who you are now. In spite of everything, it's like, no, this is what it is that you need to be doing, at least for now. And it requires you to show up in full health. So you're right, I do need to check out my period situation. I need to look at a lot of things, because when you get to a point where you've been doing the work, whatever the work looks like for you, and you are at a place of like, oh, this could turn for me, this actualization, it could turn for me. You have to know that you have to step into that with firing on all cylinders, operating on your best health, hydrated, well slept. Like, it's the only way, because the truth is this: I can be as ambitious and romanticize this new thing that I'm about to do all I want, but if I'm not healthy, it's not going to work. And the young people that I want to support are not going to get the support. So there should be no trophies for martyrdom. And I think that this is the programming and I'm doing the vulnerability. For me, it's very much so just like, I've been taught, I've seen a million times, so many women from my community have been martyred, so many, because they didn't know any better. And for me, it's like, I definitely have been a martyr for so long. And now I'm like, I don't want to do that no more. Like, luckily I'm still alive. And I still have my faculties in place, and I'm still young enough to kind of switch it around. And so I think that, there's definitely a strong call to being like, okay, now we need to kind of, get our health together and really start into the next phase of my life.
So to round up the conversation, if someone's listening and you want them to take one thing away from all of the amazing things that you've said, what would you want that to be?
Hold space for yourself. I haven't said that explicitly, but I think throughout the whole conversation, there's been examples of me holding space for myself. And not all the time did I action anything, because I didn't have the tools to action. But I suppose even when I was 11, like having my period, like 4 months before I even said anything, I was present in something was happening. And eventually actioned it. And I just think that if you can hold space with yourself and be honest about how you're feeling, good and bad, and call a thing, like, it's not something that should be ignored. Like, do not ignore what you're feeling. Hold space for yourself. Do not ignore what you're feeling. Write it down and speak about it to someone that you trust. And that is on everything, like anything. Like, there's nothing too small or too big. Like, literally anything is so important.
Thank you so much. I think that's so powerful. Where can listeners find out more about you?
You can follow me on Instagram at Allysa Rochelle. That's ALLYSA ROCHELLE. I'm quite active on Instagram, so if you follow me there, then you'll find links to everything else I do.
Great. And all of your links will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's allowed me to tap into like a different part of my experience. So thank you so much. It's amazing.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenise Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.